the chairman of the FNPF board, board members, the chief operating officer, Mr. Rob Johnsey, the head of regional representative of ADB, our expert from ADB, Gara from Manila, ladies and gentlemen, and in particular also big Bulavinaka to all our participants from the other Pacific Island countries who are here to join us, to be able to have discussions around superannuation schemes, about our provident fund schemes, also in relation to the medical or health cover that we need to develop in our respective countries. I do not intend to speak for long, ladies and gentlemen, but essentially I wanted to just talk very briefly about some of the key pertinent issues facing Pacific Island countries, and also in respect of the individual challenges that we would have from the respective island countries. And I'd like to also contextualize it within the Fijian context and give you some of the experiences that we have had. Just yesterday, next door in the other hall, I opened a forum in respect of the NGN, which is the Next Generation Network pertaining to technology, and moving on from 4G to 5G. And one of the issues highlighted there was that the Pacific Island countries, given the economies of scale of the individual countries, have enormous challenges to be able to attract investment, to be able to adopt technology, and ensure at the same time that there is no disparity in the manner in which that technology is spread within their own country. So in other words, the advent of technology must not create further inequalities between those who may be connected and those who are unconnected. That is very, very critical. So whilst technology may be the great enabler, it also could be the great disenabler as far as equality is concerned. Similarly, we have a challenge in the Pacific regarding our pension schemes. Some of the jurisdictions in the Pacific Island countries, have only about 50,000 people. There are some countries in the Pacific that have only 12,000 people. Papua New Guinea, of course, is nearly 8 million people, and the next largest country is Fiji with 890,000. Then is Solomon Islands. Then all the other countries peter down into a few couple of 100,000 people. Now, so the pool of people that are available to be able to contribute to the superannuation funds actually become limited. So the challenges, in fact, become greater. And that, hopefully, we can have some discussions around that. But one of the issues that we find that, and hopefully this couple of days workshop that you'll be having, will be able to help develop relationships between the individual countries and those of you who are here representing your countries, and how perhaps we can help each other. The level of intelligence gathering, of intelligence sharing is very, very important. Only a few months ago, we had a very informal meeting of most of the Pacific Island finance ministers in Nandi, and we discussed a number of issues. These are discussions without the flags, we just simply had discussions. And we had the civil aviation ministers meeting. And we found that there are a number of issues that we could actually collaborate without necessarily the formalities, and be able to get some way forward and how we can collaborate with each other. So hopefully that this forum will also provide a way forward in terms of how perhaps we can synergize with each other. We have the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank is here, who's also the regulator of the Superannuation Fund. And there are many other people here that we can talk to and be able to see how we can, gain some traction in this area. And I'd like to thank, of course, the ADB in collaborating with the Fijian National Provident Fund to have this workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, I think just to put into context, the Fijian National Provident Fund has grown from a $30,000 fund in 1966 to the single largest financial institution in Fiji with an asset base of 5.13 billion Fijian dollars, equivalent to about 54% of our nominal GDP. For the financial year 2016, its return on investment stood at 7.44%, up 84 basis points from the last financial year. It is a well-diversified asset class with 23% of liquid assets holdings to meet its immediate and short-term needs. And this indeed was seen, as some of you would know, that we had the second largest storm ever recorded in the world, and the largest storm recorded in the southern hemisphere that hit Fiji. Unfortunately, it killed 44 Fijians, but also left a trail of devastation from the northeast across to the northwest of Fiji. Now, the FNPF took the initiative of disbursing funds to those people who would have been affected by the cyclone, and they disbursed $275.5 million in a very short period of time. Of course, there are some who probably should not have withdrawn the funds because they weren't affected by the cyclone, but these things do happen. But the reality is that the fund was able to withstand this type of withdrawals, yet at the same time remain financially very stable. Now, this, of course, has not happened overnight. This obviously has not happened because we decided it should happen overnight. It has actually happened because there was a recognition that things actually weren't that well. And let me tell you and contextualize, and perhaps it may ring some bells in your own jurisdictions, but in 2007, the World Bank Financial Sector Assessment Program found a number of findings in respect of the FNPF. They found that FNPF annuity business was actually unbalanced. The annuity conversion factor for single annuities at 55 years of age was set initially at a very high rate of 25%. So we had people being paid 25%, with people being paid 19%, with people being paid 15%. It was all over the board. Now, the type of returns you would get in jurisdictions like Australia and New Zealand is actually about 2 or 3 or 4%. And you actually be considered quite lucky sometimes to get that level of conversion. Now, we have in Fiji, we had these enormous rates being paid out. The solvency gap, the World Bank report found, was equivalent to about 10% of GDP then, and will increase, at that time they found, will increase to 80% of GDP by 2056. So essentially what they were saying, that by 2056, we would have had insufficient funds to pay out all the benefits that are due. Now, as Rob highlighted earlier on, that we also have, in particular in Fiji, we have a very large portion of our population in the younger bracket. Nearly 70% of our population are below the age of 40. So you could imagine a person who is at the moment 20 years old or 25 years old who's working, and if these reforms, which I'll come to later on, had not taken place, notwithstanding the fact that the World Bank was, yelling and screaming through this report to say, you've got to do something about it. If nothing had been done about it, by 2056, the persons who had contributed would have had no pensions to actually reach out to, notwithstanding the fact that they had actually contributed towards it. And this, unfortunately, of course, has been the fate in some of the other jurisdictions throughout the world. In some Pacific Island countries, we've had some issues with the superannuation funds, and we've seen that in other developing countries. What government decided at that point in time was that we need to have a major reform in respect of the superannuation fund to ensure, firstly, that it's sustainable. That persons who actually contribute to that must be able to get their pension. It is only fair, it is only just that they do get those funds. Now, what that meant was a complete revision of the rules pertaining to the superannuation fund, of the laws pertaining to superannuation fund. It also meant, for example, and let me give an example, there was, of course, back in the 1960s, when the superannuation fund was introduced, it was a different era altogether. The board membership, for example, of the superannuation fund included or had representations 2 or 3 from government, 2 or 3 from the employer organizations, and 2 or 3 from the trade union organizations. In a modern day and age, when you have a growing population, when you have a large pool of funds, when you need to make investments that are secure for the people who are actually contributing now to ensure the sustainability of the funds, you actually need to have professionals running the organization. You need to ensure that people who sit on the board are people who can actually contribute to that. It's not an issue about employer, employee, or government representation. It's an issue about making sure you have people with financial background expertise, people who may be engineers, because, for example, the fund may be investing in large structures, and FNPF indeed is one of the largest investors in real estate in Fiji. They partially own this hotel. I think they fully own the one next door. They own 2 other hotels in Fiji. Now, there are other properties that they own. Now, if you do not have that type of expertise to sit on your board, then obviously the type of vision, the type of decisions that will be made by the board will be, diplomatically speaking, very skewed. You will not necessarily have the right input, the right expertise. At the end of the day, the rationale for having a board is to ensure that your shareholders in a corporate setting get the best return. In this particular case, you need to appoint the best people so that the members of the fund actually get the best return. The members of the fund know that their investment, their contributions are secure. That is very critical. Let me tell you, we had the FNPF investing, for example, in now the Intercontinental Hotel with business partners from overseas who were undischarged bankrupts from other jurisdictions. And the cost of the construction of those hotels were way above the market rates. We had another particular investment in the hotel where the FNPF, notwithstanding that it was the larger contributor to the credit or the debt structure of that particular company or that particular investment, the manager of that was somebody else, the Fiji Development Bank, which is another story that we can discuss. Perhaps we should have a workshop on that. But these are the kind of shenanigans that actually went on. And these are the kind of shenanigans that need to be stopped. And all of us, those of us in Fiji and the other Pacific Island countries, need to be very wary of this. Because sometimes the Provident Fund funds are actually seen as a bit of a slush fund. There's also this culture that if you do not get any funds from mainstream banks, commercial banks, then let's go to FNPF. And let's go to FDB. Now, that obviously has been stopped. So the reforms that did take place, stopped a number of other, what we would call untoward practices. So there were about 22 different reasons for which you could withdraw your FNPF funds. 22. Now there's about 9. Perhaps that can be sharpened too. But the fact of the matter is that the FNPF board, the FNPF management over the years, reconfigured the FNPF's image as if it was a savings bank. It is not a savings account where you put in money this week and 1 month later you're going to take some money out. That's how it was seen. It is security for your future. It is security for when you retire. That's why it's called a pension fund. But when you have so many different criteria to be able to withdraw it, and unfortunately a lot of this was precipitated after the first coup in 1987, that led to a lot of structures being, going haywire, that has obviously been rationalized. The fund at that point in time had not had any actuarial certification. It was never done. No actuarial certification was ever obtained for the fund until the reforms. There was no solvency certificate. The accounts had not been audited for about 3 or 4 years. So these are the kind of trials and tribulations that FNPF went through and in fact had experienced, and a lot of the matters weren't attended to. And it took the administrative and the political will to be able to ensure that we have for the future an arm's length dealing with the FNPF. We must ensure that there should be no political interference in the day-to-day operations of the Provident Fund. We must ensure that whenever we appoint a board, you appoint the best people who can contribute positively to the funds. It's very sophisticated markets now we are developing. In order to ensure that Fiji provides a good return to its members, the Fiji National Provident Fund, it does need to sometimes invest offshore. Do you have the capacity within the organization itself to be able to do that? Now, there is, I know, talk about health coverage, and FNPF has over the years been mooted as one of the better organizations to be able to provide health insurance cover. I have an issue with that. And the issue is twofold. One of them is that to be able to provide good health cover, in particular locally, you need to ensure that we have full tertiary medical care available in Fiji. To be able to minimize the cost of your health cover. I'm sure the health people over here will tell you the cost, and perhaps some of them are actually making losses but sustaining it through other aspects of their businesses. But the reality is that the cost of health cover must be brought down. Secondly, there are literally thousands of people in Fiji who are not part of the formal sector, formal employment sector. You would find when you drive from Suva to Nandi, a lot of people sell coconuts by the roadside. They sell all sorts of fruits. They sell root crops. Now, those people do not pay FNPF. They are self-employed. So by saying to have health insurance cover only to members of Fiji National Provident Fund or any superannuation fund would actually, the question then we would ask is, what about those people? How will they be covered? So we have to be able to ensure that there is an ability, when we do talk about health cover in Fiji, we do not forget those people who are not part of the formal sector. We need to provide them cover. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reality is that following the reforms, the Fiji National Provident Fund was in fact given a number of international awards, and there were 3 awards. Now, this was they received 3 International Merit Awards from the International Social Security Association, and also in 2015 for FNPF's Information Communication Technology Reforms, and 2012 for its pension scheme reform and the promotion of financial literacy. So the reality is that it is always very good for any organization to get what we call third-party validation. If we get third-party validation from organizations that specialize in these areas, then you know that you're doing the right thing. And I think it is very critical to ensure that we regularly have checks and balances within these organizations. We must be able to also, for example, if we are able to use the superannuation fund to improve the living conditions of our people, but at the same time get a better return, then these are some of the areas that we should look into. One of them, of course, I had some informal discussions with the chairman of FNPF, is we're looking at the housing sector. As you know, those of you who would have experience, for example, Singapore, the Housing Development Board in Singapore, which is very heavily subsidized, but the superannuation fund in Singapore allows members to draw in excess of 60% of their total savings to contribute to the purchase of their first home. This is why Singapore today has one of the highest rate of home ownership. I think it's about 93%. But with housing also, there's also a trick. We've had, for example, what we call low-cost housing. Now, a politically correct term is affordable housing. In Rewanga, in places like Nambua. Now, those people, a lot of them have actually spent about 2 generations in those very modest accommodation. But the reality is, whenever we want to increase home ownership, we must ensure by a person owning the first home, they must be given the opportunity, or that asset must give them the opportunity to have what we call social mobility. If a person buys a low-cost housing home, they must be able to, in a few years' time, if they get a better job, or the children contribute to the welfare or to the family's budget, be able to buy a bigger house, be able to move to somewhere else if they choose to, may be able to add an additional bedroom, and they can go to mainstream commercial banks. But if the real estate prices in that particular area remain stagnant, or indeed depreciates, then the ability to have social mobility is very, very limited. So Singapore again has done, I'm digressing slightly, but I think it's very important. Singapore again has been able to do that quite well. So in their housing estates, or in their 20-story apartment blocks, they will have relatively expensive apartments, middle-range apartments, affordable housing, affordable apartments, sometimes on the same floor, sometimes on different floors, but all in close proximity. So the idea is that the real estate therefore continues to appreciate. And in Fiji, unfortunately, that has not really worked, and that's some of the areas that we are targeting in the next few years, and hopefully with the collaboration of the Fijian National Provident Fund, we've also reached out to the World Bank in that respect to be able to get that level of expertise. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to very quickly just tell you where, following the reforms, what actually also happened is that the Fiji National Provident Fund has managed to now, as far as energy is concerned, now post the reform, the present energy conversion factor at 55 years is 8.7%. That is relatively high. The age-specific energy factors following reforms, there is a specific energy conversion factor from age 55 ranging from 8.7%, as I highlighted, to 23.3%, of course at the age of 100, which is quite a bit of a long shot. But none the fact, it is there. Now, none of this would have been possible without the reforms. So the message that I would like to give to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, is that please use this workshop to be able to, of course, hear from the experts, but to be able to network with each other. As we have seen in this particular hotel's case, it's an opportunity where I understand Nest Fund is a shareholder in this hotel, together with the Fijian National Provident Fund. So you have one superannuation fund from Papua New Guinea collaborating with the superannuation fund from Fiji. And there are other types of opportunities that may exist in other Pacific Island countries. It's a good time to network. It's a good time also to learn from our mistakes and actually be upfront about our mistakes. I mean, we need to be able to talk where the problems are, and once we identify the problems, then we must have the will to be able to address those issues. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to, of course, congratulate the Fijian National Provident Fund for its 50 years in existence. It was an idea that, of course, that started in the 1960s, and today FNPF, as we said, holds the largest cash reserves in Fiji. It is a major player, and it also does provide for a fantastic social security network for the workers of Fiji. And we hope to, of course, with the changes that have been made, before we used to have equal contributions by employer-employees. Today, an employer by law is now required to contribute 10%, as opposed to the employee now contributing 8%. Of course, in places like Singapore, the employers contribute less than the employees. But in Fiji's case, we've decided it's the other way around, given the fact that we have some very attractive tax benefits for employers. Now, we'd also like to congratulate ADB for the 50 years in existence. ADB has played a very important role in this part of the region. We have, of course, renewed our collaboration with the ADB, and we'd like to thank Rob in particular for this assistance. We have a number of technical missions on the ground at the moment, a number of reforms we'd like to implement, and it's also good to ensure that we're able to have those types of relationships with multilateral agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very good workshop. Nakavakalewu, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General and Minister for Economy.